So, our speaker today, George Papageorge, is thrilled to be the director of Family Wellness Ministry at the Metropolis of San Francisco, working alongside Presbytera Patsagalaikis, another Seattle native. Very happy about that. George is a licensed psychotherapist specializing in marriage and family counseling, and a popular seminar speaker who is in high demand nationwide. I can vouch for that. Working in the areas of empathy-based relationships, parenting with emotional intelligence, family systems therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and addiction recovery, George offers patients a path toward integrating sensible psychological insights with a solid orthodox foundation. He holds bachelor's degrees in psychology and in ancient biblical literature from Simpson College. That one I didn't know. That was awesome. I want to talk to you more about that one. And a Master of Arts degree in marriage and family therapy from Azusa Pacific University. Currently, he's also a adjunct professor in the Graduate School for Family Therapy at Santa Clara. George and his wife Kim have two grown children, Olivia and Peppers. Round of applause, please, for George Papageorge.
Alrighty, well, delighted to be back again this year. And so we're going to look at a couple things. I always get humbled because, my wife and I, Kim, have been married, 32, going on 33 years. And it's always a journey. And what's so funny about marriage is, like, whatever personal stage you're in, it almost in a way brings new challenges, like it's supposed to actually, to the growth of the marriage. Because if we didn't change, then the marriage wouldn't have to change. When you guys start raising kids, you'll get your child and you'll figure them out in each stage about the time they're leaving that stage. And you're an expert for like a week.
Yes.
And then you get to the next stage again, and this great thing of humility hits us all over again. So it's all a journey, and so I'm in the journey with you guys. As was mentioned, my day job is over there in Pleasanton, marriage family therapy for all these years. Worked with a lot of students as well in the area. And now working with college students in Santa Clara is a blast. Because what I teach is family therapy, and I have a lot of deep conviction around understanding the family as a system. And as we talk about marriage a bit today, you're creating your own system. I had when I was in grad school, I had a car that was like newer in the 80s. I was in grad school in the 80s, and I had what was called a Bronco 2. So there was all these cool Broncos in the 70s. Then they weren't Broncos for a while, and then they came out with these Bronco 2s, and I had this Bronco 2. Love my Bronco 2. Now, why am I telling you about the Bronco 2? Loved that car. It served me well, and but I remember this red light on the dashboard. You know how that is? It has a lot of different red lights. There was one that I was curious what it was, but never curious enough to find out what it was. Long story short is, it was like this little icon of looked like a little plumbing kind of icon. What do you think that could have been? Okay, but plumbing, not oil can, water, yeah. So yeah, I didn't find out either. It turned out it was a water pump. And so I ignored the water pump, and what do water pumps do? They cool down the engine. So I kept not investigating that little familiar, because it was there long enough, you stop seeing it. I don't know if you ever realize that in life. If something's there long enough, you actually stop seeing it. And so I stopped seeing it until it blew the engine completely. And I said bye-bye to my Bronco 2. It was a nice Bronco 2. I loved the Bronco 2. It didn't deserve such an ending. But I mentioned that for a couple reasons. One is, when we talk about our marriages, when we talk about psychology, the interesting thing is, you can have the most loving relationship, but how you function is going to come up on your dashboard. So some couples, some families may end up like my Bronco 2, and that is, it never learned how to cool itself down, because the part that was supposed to cool down was dysfunctioning. So you could have a lovely wife or a bunch of lovely kids, but there's going to be curiosity around, but how do we function? Because really how we function is really going to tell the end of the story. So I want us to have kind of a practical, almost appreciation that as this love that you guys have that's so evident, but keep in mind, but how do we function around things? There's some couples who love each other, but they don't know how to cool down. Or there's other engines, let's say, if it's us couples, it might be that something comes up on the dashboard, and like me, I ignored it. That's probably similar to my personality, because I don't like conflict. If I just say that red light's not blinking, then everything's okay. And then within the year, blown engine. The other thing we could say is, I think the Lord gives us a spouse because in a way, if you haven't noticed already, they kind of become part of the dashboard. Why? Because they are very ready to signal you when they think you are dysfunctioning. Okay? So however we embrace this metaphor of the dashboard, the lights will blink. Now I will also say something great about our faith. Saint Isaac of Syria. I don't know if you read any Saint Isaac. So he's in Syria about the time where there's the rise of Islam. The dude rocks on. He like studied the Quran, and you could because he had to deal with all this new, and he's right in that region. And he has writings where he uses the Quran to prove the divinity of Christ to Muslims. Yeah, that's how smart he is. I get the chills thinking about it. So anyway, cool guy. And but he has a really quotable quotes. My favorite, some of these saints have quotes that are so like worthy of like psychology journals. They're so deep and all that. The one I like with him from him is, to see yourself as you really are is a miracle greater than raising the dead. So we see in our faith, what's getting at is, one of the most esteemed traits we can have as Orthodox is the courage, the miracle of self-reflection. So parting the Red Sea, that's pretty good. Raising the dead, not bad. Seeing yourself as you really are, that's a miracle. So we come into marriage with some notion of who we are, but we come together and then we start seeing sides of ourselves come out, either that surprises us or surprises our spouse, or we get, again, from the dashboard, we get signaled that things are coming up. And in a way, that's how it's supposed to be. Because on our own, we won't see ourselves as we really are, because we're prone toward denial and self-delusion. So as these things come up, so I'm just saying, I like the way in which healthy psychology fits beautifully with the teaching of the church and the miracle around really looking at ourselves and knowing that things come up. Now, I teach family therapy at Santa Clara, so my students, we just did the midterm last week. They'll turn their paper in 3 weeks and we'll have the final. The paper, because I teach family therapy, they have to write a paper on 3 generations of family dynamics. And then apply everything we're learning to their family and all the generations. What's cool about that, and that's called family systems psychology. What's cool about that is, and I want to look at a scripture here, is that sometimes family systems don't want to face who they really are. Sometimes family systems like to keep secrets, or like to tell stories, or give the good narrative, when for generations the people in the system really know the real story. And that actually hurts our soul. But we kind of inherit it sometimes. And so we see sometimes in generational families, and we're just little kids at the time going like, so that's how it works around here. It might be when dad's angry, we no longer have anything to say, magically. Or when mom cries, then it's all about attending her emotions, and I'm not supposed to have my own. These kinds of things go on in family systems all the time, and we learn all these like nuances to how families function. So you guys are coming together and forming a family. And again, think of my Bronco too. You're gonna love it. You're gonna have like really red paint job, great tires, 4-wheel drive. You're gonna dig what you guys are putting together. But you're gonna have this opportunity to pay attention. What I'd even call, for us Greeks, we kind of, big fat Greek wedding, and it's not a movie, it's a documentary, the whole thing, right? But we know that to be our ethnic culture, but know this. You're putting together your own emotional culture. You're formulating your own culture. What culture will you have? Playful culture, argumentative culture, have to be right culture. When I have feelings, I shut down culture. When I have feelings, I'm gonna have feelings all over the dinner table culture. However you do it, you're forming a culture. And then again, we'd say, gosh, sign me up for like, I love that Bronco too, but we really don't want to blow the engine. We really want to pay attention to how it's functioning. It's a real practical reflection. How are we functioning? It's great that you have feelings, but how do you do your feelings? I accept that you're angry, but how do you do your anger? So this kind of thing, I want us to be thinking about. Now, what I'd like to do, I don't know if you guys read your Bibles much. Do you guys read your Bibles much? Hope so. Have you ever heard of red letter edition? So here's my New Testament, and when it has red letters, and the red letter editions do it, the Orthodox Study Bible does it. There it is, legit, right? It is, right? What's red letter edition? It's the words of Christ. Anytime Christ is speaking, it's in red letters. That's cool. What we're going to do today in the next few minutes is I want us to talk about applied marriage, almost to say, are you going to have a red letter marriage? Are you going to have a marriage that lines up with the words of Christ? What he was about, what he taught, how he taught, and in the Gospels, he shows lots of different relationships that he has with different kinds of people. I want us to take, we're going to pick one section of red letters and reflect on that a little bit. But for instance, I'll give you an example. You've heard of the parable of the talents. That's in red letters because that's the teaching of Jesus. And he went and gave 5 talents to one guy, 2 talents to another guy, and 1 talent. Do you know how the story goes? The guy with 5 talents went and invested and got 5 more. The guy with 2 talents invested and got 2 more. The guy with 1 talent said, oh, that master's a hard character. I'm just going to bury that talent. So when the master came back to see what they did with their talents, the guy with 5 had 10, well done, good and faithful servant. The guy with 2 had 4, well done with good and faithful servant. The guy who had the 1, who buried it, said, bro, why did you bury it? I didn't give you that just to bury it. You treat it like it was dead. And then he said, depart from me, and that's how that story goes. Now, just as a for instance, if we go, we're going to reflect on our red letter marriage, we may say, God is blessing you with many things. So if we just kind of play with this little, red letter imagery I'm using, we might say, gosh, okay, I get that parable. The Lord wants us to multiply the blessings he's given us. But we could even say then, in our marriage, in what way will we multiply God's blessings through our marriage? Because lots of couples go, okay, we're together, I have to stop, I don't have to think anymore, I don't have to post anymore, I don't have to go look for that guy anymore, whatever. And some people just bury their sense of who they are. I'm good, got hitched. And in so doing, they bury who they are. They no longer have their individual self, or they no longer have this sense that what they do with it is this blessing to multiply this graciousness that God has given. So that's just an example of where we could, what I would say, I think could be a fun exercise. You could look through the Gospels, red letter, and just go, how does our marriage line up with that account in the Gospels? The one we're going to look at is in Matthew 13, where it says this, and it's very familiar. On the same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the sea, and great multitudes were gathered together to him, so that he got into the boat and sat, and the whole multitude stood on the shore. Then he spoke many things in parables. Behold, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seed fell on the wayside, on the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Some fell on stony places where they did not have much earth, and they immediately sprang up, but because they had no depth of earth, but when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. And some fell among the thorns, and the thorns sprang up and choked them, but others fell on the good soil and yielded a crop, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. So, help me out on this one. We have what I'm going to call uh-oh, there goes that again. My book right up there. That top book. That's not going to stand right. Unfortunately, we tried earlier. Yeah, okay.
He's great.
I know, we'll pull it out then. I'm going to use a better grip right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Okay.
Sorry, George.
So we have marriage on the path. The second one was the rocky marriage. The next one was the thorny marriage. And here we have the good soil marriage. Okay, so we're going to take just a couple minutes to reflect on what the gospel reading is saying and apply it to the different kind of marriages we can have. And what happens when we're the marriage on the path, when we have rocks in the soil, rocky marriage, lots of thorns in the soil, thorny marriage, and what he calls the good soil marriage. So what I'd like you guys to do, I'm going to read a little bit here. What's interesting about this, Jesus goes on to say, and the disciples came and said to him, "Why do you speak to us in parables?" He answered and said, "Because it has been given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For whoever has, to him more will be given, and he who has abundance, but whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. Therefore, I speak to them in parables," check this out, "because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand." And so what I want to just land on that point to say, Jesus speaks in parables because for those who actually want to see something, they're going to see it in a parable. Those who want to hear it, they're going to hear it in a parable. Those who are open to understand, they're going to understand it in a parable. Those who have eyes and don't see, ears don't hear, who look at something and don't want to understand, they're going to look at the story and go, what's that story all about? I think that's a good reflection in marriage because we're in the information generation. Everything you need to get a good marriage is available to you. There's a book for it. And yet millions upon millions, the majority of couples will look at that and not see it, hear it, not hear it, they'll hear it, not understand it, and they'll go on and be the way of my Bronco 2. So as we're looking at this, I like that challenge, like, wow. And in human behavior, and again, going back generations, sometimes even generationally, you may inherit a little bit of like, yes, I see it, no, I don't. I'm totally listening, I don't care. Oh, I get you. Are we done? Okay, so there's like patterns over generations sometimes that can kind of plop us into this thing that Jesus is asking us to reflect, to say, I'm going to give you a parable, and man, if you want to see it, it's going to be so clear. You want to hear it? You're going to hear it all day long. If you want to understand it, it's going to go deep in your bloodstream. And that's what I want us to kind of have the spirit of that as we look. So he goes on to say, because they ask him, and very few parables in the Gospels does he go on and explain it. But here he says, therefore, hear the parable of the sower. So he's going to explain it. Now, as I'm doing it, because I'm going to ask you guys to talk at your tables for a minute, to then reflect, okay, what are we learning from the parable if it's applied to marriage on the path? What do we learn from the parable if it's the soil that had all the rocks in it? And so on. Therefore, hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, then the wicked one comes and snatches it away, what was sown in his heart. This is he who receives seed by the wayside, or the path. So did you catch that one? So the seeds landed on the path. The birds of the air snatched it up. Here's Jesus saying, it's like receiving the truth, and it gets snatched away from ever putting it in your heart. But he who received the seed on the stony places, the rocky marriage, This is he who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself. You're going to discuss what that could mean. But endures only for a while. For when tribulation and persecution arises, because of the word, immediately he stumbles. Now he receives seed among the thorns, he who hears the word, and the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, the seed, and he becomes unfruitful. But he who received the seed on good ground is he who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and produces some 100, some 60, and some 30-fold. Okay, so at your tables, use your imaginations. What do you think, what are you going to come up with to say, these are the characteristics? In fact, I kind of created, informal questions. On each one, what kind of marriage is being described here? Another kind of way to answer it, what would likely be true about their communication? People on the path, marriage, couple on the path, how they communicate, rocky marriage communicate, thorny marriage communicate, good soil. And if you will, you could even reflect on what kind of emotional subculture could be true for those families. Okay? So again, rocky, so birds of the air snatch it up. Jesus says the rocky, the roots don't go deep, so it gets scorched. Has no root in himself. Here, this is the cares of the world get in the way. And the good soil, the roots go deep, and they multiply, they're fruitful. So go ahead and ready, set, go on describing those marriages. Okay, all right, we've got the 4 soils. Let's hear a little bit about marriage on the path, on the wayside. What is that telling us? What kind of marriage, how would you describe that marriage as doing the marriage on the path? What do you think? Yep.
Yeah, so what we were talking about is the marriage on the path is like the marriage that's determined by the people around you, essentially. So we're thinking something along the lines of arranged marriage, or the one that the relationship that you allow to be influenced by the people in your life, and therefore they're controlling and taking advantage of your marriage and your relationship.
Interesting.
So there's actually no base or root to begin with.
Right, so nothing can, no root can break into that hard path. Those are interesting reflections. What else do we think of on the hard path? Anyone else? We might even think, if we get a little, go with that as far as like therapeutically or psychologically, we may even say people who are hardened will typically live externally. People that are hardened won't go into their inner life. And so they were fine having the seeds on the outside. But what happens when your life and everything of your value is on the outside? It's only a matter of time that something's going to snatch it up. Right? And so when your well-being, talk about internal locus of control versus external locus of control. External locus of control is when the majority of your well-being is based on things outside of you. Internal locus of control, majority of your well-being comes from what's going on inside of you. So even raising kids today, because we live in a very external world where really well-meaning parents are raising high-performing kids, by accident, they're actually raising kids with an external locus of control, and they feel good about themselves when they're high performers. And what does that do? The birds of the air snatch it up, and when they have a bad game, a bad test, or even anticipate one, they have panic attacks. And that their self-esteem is based on circumstance. So you're either going to be a perfectionist driving yourself crazy, or a control freak driving your spouse crazy. Take your pick. Right? And I would say, interesting that it says the birds of the air, which means like the enemy himself, the devil and all of the dark side is, and the fathers teach this, that they utilize our unresolved issues to try to bring us down, try to torture us. And so life, or we could say life without the inner life, marriage without the inner life, is the marriage on the path. What kind of communication do you think takes place in that marriage?
Shallow.
So, yeah, it could be shallow, it could be superficial. It can even be competitive, interestingly enough.
Yeah.
It's more common than you might think.
Yeah.
But keep in mind that if we're kind of going with kind of our reflection, we'd say their self-esteems are based on what's outside of them, so they're likely going to be feeling empty about something. A lot of couples, instead of that self-reflection, will go, oh, I know why the emptiness is there. I'm falling out of love. Sayonara, so long, farewell, I'll be there saying goodbye. And so they're out believing that the problem was them, because their view of life is out there. Right? Okay. All right. Here's this soil that had a lot of rocks in it, and it was described as it springs up. It has shallow roots, but it springs up with joy. Everything seems really good, but the roots aren't deep. And then it says when the sun hits, it gets scorched. What kind of marriage are we talking about? What did you guys come up with? What do you think? Yeah.
I have lost answers. So something we came up with is that like it's that marriage where it's two people who are so excited to start their lives together. They're so in love with one another. They're like, we're gonna get married and it's gonna be amazing, but they're people who have never actually fought any hardship with each other. So by the time that they actually reach some sort of conflict within the marriage, everything immediately dissolves because they don't know how to get through that together, and they think, oh, it means that my significant other is not going to support me. They don't love
They're not the
me,
one for me, or
and
something like that.
It dies.
Super insightful. Yes.
I think of a celebrity marriage fits
Oh,
into that
yes.
category where, oh, let's get married.
Yeah, hot as can be, yeah.
And then have the best wedding and the best place and the best venue, and then, oh, a few years.
Yes, and the roots don't go deep. An interesting reflection that a well-meaning, super loving couple, if they don't face their own stuff, let alone have it come up, know how to handle it when each other's stuff comes up, then that's when they get scorched. And the roots didn't extend into. Keep in mind, by the way, so often we're good at positive emotions. So, football's going on. If you picture a whole football field, all our emotions are spread across 100 yards. So let's go first 50 are positive emotions. Right on, that's cool, that's so fun, I'm glad we did that bonding. Oh, that's the first 50, all the good feelings. The second 50 is our negative emotions. How well versed are we in knowing how to run those yards? And very often, in the second 50 yards, in those negative emotions, sometimes we get it sort of boiled down to annoyed and pissed off. And even if we're sad, we're annoyed and pissed off. And even if we're lonely, we're annoyed and pissed off. And even if we're
Happy.
So after a while, the hair trigger is it gets me annoyed and pissed off. And that couple, because the root doesn't go deep enough, they're not necessarily having the EQ, emotional intelligence, to say, I'm actually feeling sad, as opposed to I'm acting annoyed and pissed off when I'm sad. And us guys, just research would say we tend to do what they call the secondary negative emotions. So primary is stuff like I'm sad, I'm lonely, I'm hurting, I have a lot of fear coming up. That's primary. Usually when you share those kinds of feelings, someone's not gonna get defensive.
Right.
But if you do primary, but only deliver it in the secondary, I'm bugged, I'm pissed, I'm bugged, you annoy me, there you go again. And all the while, we were sad, fearful, lonely, disappointed. So as we think about the roots, we'd say, can these roots in the soil even go into emotional awareness to know how to do our negative emotions? So really good insights on, we do our happy emotions, but do we as a couple know how to do our negative emotions? Okay, the thorny marriage. What kind of, what'd you guys come up with? All those thorns. What happens in that marriage? What do you think? Okay, so give me the defensive couple. Yeah, and even thorny is a good word for that. And notice if it's the cares the world, sometimes it can even bring the question, do we really have clarity on our priorities? Because sometimes, you want to make it, you want to buy that house, do all the things that you're going to be busy doing, so sometimes the cares of the world become primary, and who that person actually is becomes, someone that's just helping me get to the cause. And as opposed to the love being the cause, sometimes the cares of the world. I'm somebody if and when. And so cares of the world. What else goes with cares of the world? What kind of emotion do you think if you're sort of chasing after the cares of the world? Okay, you mean neglected? What other kind of emotion can come up in you when life starts getting filled with a lot of things to get done? Stress. Yeah, so even the simplicity of stress can be absolutely the thorny marriage. And we'd say, well, how do I deal with stress? Because so often we do all the ugly stuff because we're stressed out. Wait till parenting. Right? So this is where we're saying, wow, depending on what soil we're planting all this in, are we going to learn how to manage stress? And you know how we're talking about generations? It's amazing what starts repeating itself under stress. So it might be that, no problem, you're good. So under stress, what kind of marriage do we have versus when we're not under stress? So let's be thinking about that. Now, just to get done here with the 4 soils, the good soil, what came up for you guys, and what kind of communication, what would describe the good soil marriage? Proactive, yeah. And interesting, proactive, not reactive. Proactive, not passive. And we can also say proactive, if we have passive and aggressive, then we say proactive or assertive is what we're going for. Because sometimes you'll have the person like, come on, and they don't know they're aggressive, and they'll call themselves proactive, but they're actually being aggressive. So I like the word proactive. I like the word assertive because it is distinct from reactive. It's certainly distinct from passive. What else would describe the good soil marriage? Or what kind of communication? Or what else would describe it? Any more thoughts?
It's balanced.
Okay, how do you mean?
So there's going to be a balance between how each person is independently, but also learning how to work dependently with one another.
Oh, are you in my class in family therapy? You are coming up. Yes, it's awesome. So check
Parents
this
are
out.
going-
So that balance, right? So in the research on family therapy, they'll say there's 2 life forces in every couple and ultimately in the family they raise. Togetherness or connection and autonomy. And we could meet with 10 families and assess how they do that. Now for Greeks, which way do you think they lean? Connection or autonomy? Connection. So connection, we love our connection, but when you want to go, leave by 9:00 p.m., it's like, why you leave me? Come back here. How could you do that to me? And so we err on the side of feeling guilty to be our own person in some of our cultures, right? And so we just keep that in mind for a couple. Sometimes this whole love thing is all yummy, except sometimes it's dysfunctioning because it's so dependent, and we get threatened by the autonomy of the other. So again, we're looking for that balance between connection and autonomy. And if you're not balancing it, you will, like my Bronco 2, you will get red lights on your dashboard. And it's going to come in the form of the person, like, they don't make eye contact with you because they're afraid you're going to just suck them in. Or what? Like, it's funny how when we don't have enough autonomy, at some point when the other person keeps growing, they're going to feel almost afraid or scared or adverse to connecting because it feels like quicksand. So, and all the next year we'll talk about attachment in this thing. All the studies on attachment theory. Mm-hmm. And some of us have insecure attachment, some of us have disorganized attachment and anxious attachment. And so then we'd say, as we think about these soils, what's the health of the attachment?
Is codependency in that list?
Yeah, so codependency would be definitely, yes, it's not called that in the research, but what we know about codependency fits into all that insecure attachment, for sure, right? And so as we think about that, then we go, wow, balance between who I am as a person and who we are as a couple. And we sacrifice, but we don't get lost, right? So, all that said, let's wrap it up here. Now, the one thing I'm going to add to the good soil is good soil doesn't become good soil all on its own. And I wrote here, till the soil. You know what a rototiller is, right? Those blades are sharp, man. And I would say, if we say, here's the 4 kinds of marriages, we'd also say those are the 4 kinds of conditions of our heart. And what does Psalm 51 say? The sacrifices of God are a broken and contrite heart. Where do we go with our brokenness? See, when we're someone who goes to the Lord with our brokenness, and we see when he gets his hands on it that there's this bonding that takes place, and in fact, it's in our brokenness we discover we need a Savior. Imagine being a Christian and you don't face your brokenness. That would be like the lamest church club in the world. Like, there's so many other places to be. Like, why would I want to be in a place that is a spiritual hospital and act like it's some kind of country club? So where we go with our brokenness really defines our spiritual life. And that brokenness is how we find, not only do we find God, we actually find what's underneath the brokenness, which is you. All sides of you. All parts of us that we have to face. To see yourself as you really are is a miracle greater than raising the dead. And God doesn't like us to be all broken, but he's a perfect steward to say, when you face your brokenness, guess what you're going to find? You're going to find the true God, and you're going to find your true self, your authentic self. Imagine a marriage that knows how to welcome brokenness. That's different than, oh, you still have that issue? Oh, you remind me of your mother right now. Okay, whatever. Okay. So that wouldn't be embracing the brokenness. Is your partner's brokenness welcomed, embraced, understood, or even have you revealed it? The good soil tills it all up. And anything, thorns, rocks, get dealt with over the years of marriage to create that good soil, so that then even the children, if that's God's will for you, come up in a family that's not full of rocks and thorns. So I want to close with this little quote. I brought 3 books to do it. The quote's out of 1 book. So I had never, back 23 years ago, I had never heard of this guy, Saint Silouan. He's a Russian dude. He actually was a stud military guy who was serving the military in Russia in the late 1800s. And he got in a barroom brawl, just wrecked a guy, and thought he killed him. And he was so thankful the guy didn't die, he repented and eventually went to, not that long after, went to Mount Athos and lived the rest of his life as an Orthodox monk. His writings are amazing and interesting when you read his stuff. This is a great book, St. Silouan the Athonite. So what's interesting is the guy that wrote it was his like little assistant monk, this guy Sophrony. Silouan didn't write this stuff. Sophrony wrote it because Silouan actually wrote it on little scraps of paper. And Sophrony, who's this guy, brought all of Silouan's writings to life. This guy Sophrony is amazing. So then the guy that was the assistant to Sophrony, this guy ended up in Essex, England, and started a monastery, St. John Baptist. Sophrony lived till just a few years ago. The guy that was his assistant is this guy, where I'm going to get the quote from. Now, that was quite an intro to this guy. So this guy, well, and I'm personally doing it because as an adult Orthodox person, I had never really had a real experience with a saint. I dug them, they're fine, they're icons. I'm not against saints. I had never had a personal thing until Silouan was a gift from God, and the Lord picked Silouan for me to kind of get acquainted with. And things happened even around that I just, just as part of the wonder of our faith on how, when you get to actually know a saint, how much you even get to know the Lord more. It's really kind of fascinating. So the fact that this guy is kind of the spiritual grandson of Silouan caught my attention, and good buddies of mine, Father Timothy Pavlatos and Father Vasily Hillhouse, who are on my family wellness team, said, "Oh, George, you've got to read this book." So this is Zacharias. He's from Cyprus. And I believe he's in Essex now, where Sophrony was, and still alive. You can find him on YouTube. How cool! Could you imagine if the guys in the centuries gone by could have been filmed? I mean, before film, it would have been amazing, right? That's why we read them, though. So remember that first love. I'm going to read right here. Now, see that page? See how much I enjoyed that page? See that? So I read this page in February. Okay, right here. See that page? Yeah. Start at chapter 4. See that page? So I've been reading it. I'm about halfway through. See that? Isn't that cool? Yeah. All that, right? So I come back to this page over and over. So this is my page for 2023, personally. And I want to conclude with this. And I think it actually says a lot for who we are, who we can be, and if you think about it, what kind of soil we're kind of digging up, what kind of marriage we can have. Now, he says this, and I love how it gets my attention, because he starts right off the bat with, our entire struggle in this life. Okay, stop right there. Okay, that got my attention. Our entire struggle in this life, and he's going to answer it, is aimed at discovering our deep heart. Because this is a place where God manifests himself. Above all, we aim to uproot the passion of pride within us, because this is the passion which buries the heart. Okay, check how he says this. Because this is the passion that buries the heart, leaving us feeling as if we no longer had a heart. Pride stops us from loving, says St. Solomon. Indeed, true pride proceeds from humility. We might even have to have a broken heart in life. We know what our brokenness feels like, in order for love to proceed from humility. I'm not sure that's happening on this path. We might have the intention that it would happen here, and then we get stressed out, get scorched. We might have the intention here, but we get distracted. Love proceeds from humility, for the humble man has room in his heart for God and his fellow man. There's, in our urban dictionary language these days, we often hear like making space for something. You've heard that kind of talk, right? I'm making space for that. I like that language. For the humble man, I'll put it in that language, makes space in his heart, makes room in his heart for God and his fellow man. If you've ever been in a relationship, or it could even be a family member, whatever, where you're around them and you just get a sense they're not making space in their heart for you. They might be caught up in something, but it says, wow, when we make space for God, and because God is in our deep heart, we make space for our fellow man. As long as we are proud, we will be separated from our heart. We will live according to our little minds, totally missing the ultimate purpose for our coming into this life, and will end up as dry leaves blown about aimlessly in the wind. And here's the ending. If, however, I like the imagery here, if, however, we drop anchor, not only in our heart, but also in the depths of heaven, where our life is hid with Christ in God, God will make his abode in us. So I just close with, may God bless your deep hearts. And as you go to that place, you'll find that's where he manifests himself. And from there, you'll make room for him and this lovely one that you are marrying. So thank you for your good attention.